Welcome to Storytime with Tallulah. Today's reading comes from r/ProRevenge. Our first story is titled Revenge on Evil Landlord. When I was in university, I'd heard stories about horrible landlords of student housing, but hadn't experienced it myself until third year, when it felt like we got 3 years worth of poopy landlords all in one go. It began when I heard noises in the wall behind my bed at night. I brushed it off for a while until I realized that it was an animal in the wall. I told the landlords the next day and they immediately played dumb, acting as if I was stupid in front of my housemates for suggesting that something could fit inside of a wall. That was the first alarm bell. Why immediately try to embarrass me into dropping it? After explaining that I know what a cavity wall is, she asked if we'd seen anything in the kitchen. Oddly specific, we didn't think about it until later. From then on, her husband dealt with us. We weren't aware that he was our landlord too. A little time passes, still nothing done about the noise in my wall. Not that it was a surprise. I'd worked out by then that it was probably something like a mouse and that it could run through the terrace of houses as long as it didn't chew its way through my wall or die in there. I put the whole thing on the back burner. Until we were all sat in the living room and heard a thud in the kitchen, then squeaking. There was a giant rat in our kitchen. The rat disappeared into a hole in the completely crumbling kitchen wall, and the landlord claimed that we made it up and that they'd never had a rodent problem. I contacted the previous tenants through Facebooking names I found on letters for them that had been posted to us by mistake. The property had had a rat problem for the last 3 years before we moved in at least. I set a rat trap and caught one. Took photos and sent them to the landlord to tell him to sort the problem out. He told us that because there was a line in our contract about the landlord not paying for pest control, the contract specified wasp nests, etc. We didn't even think about rats when we signed it, that we'd have to pay the hundreds of pounds to fix it. He'd knowingly written that into our contract so he wouldn't have to pay out, instead of fixing the kitchen wall and the exterior wall where the rats were getting in. To cut the rest of the setting, the scene part of the story short, we called the council, who sent a pest control team. While on their visit, one of the men took my housemate to one side and told her that our landlord is evil and he is known for getting nasty. They told him that it wasn't our fault that there were rats, it was his, and he screamed in my face until he was bright red about how I was a terrible person and was trying to take him down for no reason. One of my housemates had to leave because he was scared. I wasn't. We were in a room full of men who were backing us up, making himself look worse for screaming in my face like that. I'm female and was 22 at the time, about half his size. He tried to sue us for slander. It isn't slander if it's true, so swing and a miss. Now, for the revenge. It was written into our contract that we had to be notified 24 hours in advance if anyone needed access to the house, which included house viewings. I began my mission: stop any other students from getting stuck in this heck hole. The house was being shown by agents, so it made it fairly easy. I left the rat traps in prominent places, casually explaining why we needed them if asked, and if I felt I was being too subtle, making a fake show of, "Oh gosh, please ignore the rat traps. The landlord said he'd fix the kitchen wall where they get in, but hasn't gotten around to it, so we have to catch them." I was honest about the mold problem in the bathroom. When I found out they were planning on increasing the rent by £100 a month, I made a point of saying something like, "Well, it's just about worth the rent I was paying." I made sure to say his name so they wouldn't get away with using his wife's name as a front while his reputation for aggression stayed behind. The agents never said anything to me directly, and because we had to be notified, I could always make sure I was home when there was a viewing. My housemates fully supported my revenge, but I was the woman of action in the house. When I'm sure I'm in the right, I will do what's necessary to make things right. That was until they tried to turn up unannounced one day, not even knocking, just unlocked our front door and walked in. Luckily, I was in the house and kicked them out for not informing us and told them that they were in breach of our contract. If the poopy landlord could use it to beat us with, two can play at that game. No new tenants had signed for the house by the time we were free of that heck hole. It's been 2 years now though, so I have no idea what happened to the rat house. Unfortunately, they probably found people to rent it. But hey, you did your part, and people like that should not be able to get away. It's just, I can't believe. I mean, people like that exist, unfortunately, and that's an unfortunate part of the world. But you did what you did to get back, and you did it, and it worked for the time that you put in. But unfortunately, they probably ended up getting people after that. because there was no one to stop him. Our next story is titled, "He ruined my sister's only birth experience, so I made sure he'd never forget her." Obligatory apology for formatting as I'm on mobile. Kinda my revenge, kinda my sister's, both of us really proud. This is gonna be long, so here's our cast. My sister, we'll call her Sarah for the story. Sister's ex-boyfriend, Paul. Ex-boyfriend's new wife, Jane. Ex-boyfriend's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Doe. Oldest brother, Zeke. Our parents, and me. When I was 14 and my oldest sister Sarah was 22, we found out that she was pregnant with Paul, her boyfriend of 4 years. She was pregnant with her Isn't that vor? Kind of? She ate her boyfriend and became pregnant with him? Or is that just worded differently? They immediately got engaged and they were really happy. For a time, Sarah had a horrible pregnancy, about 16 to 18 weeks, and the wonder of creating a human life evaporated within her. She developed hyperemesis, which, if you don't know, is really bad morning sickness. She was constantly in pain, she developed gestational diabetes, and just all around hated the experience. Around this time, Paul, the then fiance, started getting sick of the complaining. I believe the argument was, "Your body is built to do this, it can't be that bad." Sarah was due around Valentine's Day, and Paul's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Doe, were very excited, both about the grandkid and the fact that he could be born on a holiday. She was very against that and really hoped that her son wouldn't be born on a holiday, even one as small as Valentine's Day. Her birthday sometimes falls on Easter and she hates it, because it might make him feel that his day isn't very much about him. Well, Mrs. Doe says something like, "Well, if you name him Valentine or Valentino, then that'll make the day even more special to him." Again, my sister hated the idea. She thought it was tacky, he'd be bullied for it, and just really didn't like the name Valentino. Paul loved it, but agreed to go with a more average name like Daniel or Jared. Fast forward to February, and she was ready to get this over with. Sarah had officially been put on bed rest because while standing or walking, her blood pressure took unexpected spikes and dips. I look back now and goodness do I feel bad for her. She was doing her best to avoid giving birth on Valentine's Day because, again, she didn't want him born on a holiday. Unfortunately, births happen when they happen, and that baby was going to come on Valentine's Day, whether she wanted him to or not. I remember waiting out in the waiting room with my dad, brothers, and Paul, who couldn't stand to be in the delivery room because it was gross. I was so mad that he could have gone in but wouldn't because he thought my sister was gross while giving birth, whereas I had to stay outside because I was too young to go in with my mom and other sister. Dad went home with the youngest 2 brothers while the oldest, Zeke, stayed to watch me because I refused to leave. 16 hours after Sarah went into labor, my little nephew was officially part of the family on the evening of Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, Sarah was not okay. She had to have an emergency cesarean section, and while doing the operation discovered that the back of her uterus facing her spinal cord had a very large and very severe, thankfully non-cancerous tumor. When I say large, I mean it was twice the size of a standard uterus. The doctors were shocked and didn't understand why nobody had noticed it on an ultrasound. It accounted for her severe back pain and blood pressure issues. The doctors immediately went in for more surgery to remove the tumor, but sadly ended up having to perform a full hysterectomy. This meant that my nephew would be Sarah's only child. Now, while Sarah was in for surgery, Paul was taking care of everything baby-related to make sure his son was okay. In my 14-year-old self's memory, I remember him being suitably distraught, but I didn't really pay him much mind and spent my time in the waiting room with my mother and other sister. Zeke, however, wanted to be a good future brother-in-law and make sure that Paul was okay. He found Paul filling out the baby paperwork on his own, looking, in my brother's words, like he had not a single worry in his mind. Zeke asked why Paul didn't wait for Sarah to fill out the paperwork, as she should have been put of surgery within the hour. And Paul said that he just wanted her to get her rest and heal. That checked out with Zeke, as he was 16 and didn't know any better at the time. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. No, he wouldn't. He knows how much she hates that name, and still, she'd need to sign the paperwork too. My fellow peoples of Reddit, I regret to inform you that Paul forged Sarah's signature on the paperwork and waited until she was out of surgery to hand said paperwork over. My sweet nephew that was born on Valentine's Day was named Valentino on his first official birth certificate. I still to this day don't know why Paul and his family were so insistent about the name. He had even picked out a different one with my sister. And before you ask, no, he was never brought up on forgery charges because his parents were witnesses to her signing the papers, even though they only got there at the last minute. So Sarah dumped him and got her son's name changed a month later. She was willing to do split custody with him because that's her son's father and she wants the kid to know him. But Paul vanished and she never heard anything back, which seemed weirdly out of character to us, until a mutual friend on Facebook was tagged in his wedding pictures 6 months later. Paul had apparently started cheating on her not long after she got pregnant. Sarah was livid, but there wasn't much she could do, so she filed for child support and continued to live her best life. Until 6 years later. This is where the revenge starts, my friends. So Sarah has been a single mother for the past 6 years and has been amazing at it. At this point in my career, I've been a hairdresser for about 8 months at our local Great Clips. I'm working one day and who is seated before me but Jane, Paul's wife, herself. I take her back for a trim and she clearly has no idea who I am. That adds up because a mutual friend that still keeps in contact with Paul said that Jane doesn't know a thing. She has no idea about Sarah, that she was the other woman, or that Paul actually has a kid that he's been infrequently paying child support for. She's in the dark on it all. I told myself not to be a butt and treat her like a normal customer, which I did. Now at this point, Jane was heavily pregnant, so a lot of our conversation was about that. She loved being pregnant, but it was hard. Her husband was so unsympathetic, big shocker, and she was due in 10 weeks, and they still hadn't picked out a name for their baby girl. Ladies and gentle people, this was my chance. I asked what kind of name she was looking for, and she said, I want something unique and unusual, but not ridiculous, like Brain Talele. Brain Talele. Brian Talele. I don't know what that is. You know the ones I'm talking about. And Paul had suggested so many already, and she didn't like any of them. So I, conniving little weasel I am, said, what about Sarah? My sister's name isn't actually Sarah. She was named after an old family member that passed not long after she was born, but there was no female equivalent for his name, so our parents created one. It's a beautiful name and just what Jane was looking for. She loved it. She stuck by it, and I found out by stalking her Facebook months later that she had put her foot down about it, and that was their daughter's name. Now Paul has a daughter with his ex's name to remind him every day about her, and to also remind him to pay his effing child support. Little nephew is 10 years old now with a new name and no contact with his biological father, though we do still sometimes call him Val as a family nickname. He likes it but doesn't want to bring it to school, so it's staying a family nickname. Sarah pretends to hate when we call him that in a joking way. As long as he likes it, she doesn't have a problem with it, and she's seeing a new guy who's really great and like a father to Val. Wow, that's quite the story. Obviously, Paul sounds like an absolute poo-poo head. Cheating on anyone's not okay. Complaining that, that she's going through issues is ridiculous. Like, I don't know, how do you get somebody pregnant, you plan on having a family with them, and then you treat them like absolute crap and then cheat on them? I don't know, it just sounds like it's not a very good person. Changing the name during the birth certificate, obviously, forging's never okay. Putting down the name is obviously a bad thing. Okay, let's say there wasn't any cheating going on. Obviously, obviously he deserves to be broken up with for the cheating thing. Changing the name? I don't know if that's something, you were worried that the kid being born on Valentine's Day and having the name Valentino was going to be an issue for the child. You were trying to protect your child from not being bullied. But then you think getting rid of the father figure in their life is like, that's okay? They can't be named Valentine because they'll be made fun of, but you can completely get rid of the other parent in their life. There's so much research that having two parents in the household is so much more, it's so much better for a child. So that's the part that kind of confused me. Should he have changed the name? No. Should he have forged your name? No. He cheated on you? Should you have left him for that? Absolutely, 100%. But I think if none of that was the case, I don't know, that this to me is just, the forging thing I guess is like very shady, but But I mean, breaking up over the name, that's kind of ridiculous. But it is funny though that I mean, I don't know, because it just seems kind of against like your whole stance on like not, I don't know, it's weird. It kind of goes against like what you were saying, like trying to defend the child. But yeah, that guy sounds like an absolute turd. It sounds like you have a better life now, definitely, and I think it's absolutely hilarious that the kid's name is now your sister's name. That was so worth it. Anyways, that's it for today. So if you enjoyed this, please like it. If you enjoy these types of videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit that bell for notifications. And yeah, that's thank you all for being around. I really appreciate it. This is cool. The channel's seen some great growth. It's fantastic. It's really exciting. I'm glad you're liking it. I'm going to keep doing these for you. If you'd like to join our Discord, we have an amazing community of people. The link for that's in the description below, along with all of my other social media links if you'd like to follow me on different places of the internet. Yeah, so hopefully you're all staying safe out there in these crazy times. I know things are kind of nuts, but I'm positive they'll get better. Anyways, thank you all for everything, and with that being said, we'll see you next time.